For the first time in nearly 100 years, something unusual is happening in the United States. More Americans are choosing to move out than to move in. These aren't tourists on extended vacations or students taking a semester abroad. They're families, mid-career workers, business owners, and parents withdrawing their kids from U.S. schools and enrolling them in classrooms overseas. If you look back to the Great Depression, you won't see many modern parallels to what we're beginning to see now. Yet at this moment, multiple indicators, foreign residency approvals, citizenship applications abroad, and international university enrollments are all pointing in the same direction. A growing number of Americans are quietly relocating and starting over elsewhere. The surface-level story often focuses on falling immigration and rising removals as a sign of domestic strength. But if you look underneath that framing, you see a different pattern. Many of the people leaving are not being forced out. They're making a voluntary choice, and when citizens of a wealthy, powerful country start deciding that their long-term future looks calmer, safer, or more manageable outside their own borders, that raises a deeper question. Is this simply a short-term reaction to politics? Is it about cost of living and economics? Or is it an early sign that some Americans are reassessing their expectations about life in the US? Some observers have started using a shorthand label for this, the Donald Dash, implying a connection to the current political era. The name itself is less important than the underlying reasons. I'm Timothy, and today I want to look past slogans and social media reactions and focus on what's actually measurable. Not individual anecdotes, not just photos of people working on laptops in foreign cafes, but the broader demographic trends that suggest something meaningful may be underway. We'll look at numbers that suggest more Americans are relocating abroad, who is moving and why, and what this might mean long-term for a country that has historically been a top destination, not a source of emigration. Then we'll talk about what this could mean for the U.S. future at a time when leaders are simultaneously expressing concern about birth rates, economic growth, and overall national resilience. Because if Americans are leaving in noticeable numbers, that's not just a lifestyle story, it's a signal. A common pushback is simple. Where's the evidence? It's a fair question. The U.S. government does not maintain a comprehensive, up-to-date tally of citizens who permanently depart. Exit tracking has been limited and fragmented for years, so there is no single official chart that clearly labels Americans leaving. In situations like that, you look at surrounding indicators, and right now, several distinct data sources are all moving in the same direction. In recent years, foreign residency permits granted to U.S. citizens have risen sharply in several countries. Portugal, for example, has seen its American community grow several-fold, more than 500% in just a few years. That's not a small, gradual increase. That's a step change. Ireland and Germany report record numbers of incoming Americans. Applications from U.S. citizens for British and Irish passports, where eligible through ancestry or marriage, are at historic highs. Even the number of people voluntarily giving up U.S. citizenship, something that involves significant paperwork, fees, and potential tax implications, spiked in 2024 before Donald Trump's second inauguration and has stayed elevated since. Each data point on its own could be brushed aside. Taken together from different countries and different systems, they begin to form a pattern. Education trends tell a similar story. Over 100,000 U.S. students are currently enrolled at universities outside the United States, an all-time high. At the same time, international student numbers in some U.S. institutions have fluctuated or dipped from previous peaks. That matters because international students often go on to become residents, employees, and taxpayers in the places where they study. When more Americans are choosing to study abroad and fewer foreign students are coming in, the flow of talent, skills, and future workers starts to rebalance. Add in increased U.S. passport issuances, Americans buying property overseas, relocation and tax advisory firms reporting strong interest from U.S. clients, and it's harder to argue these are isolated flukes. Beyond the statistics, there's the human side. In countries like Portugal, Spain, and others, you can now find large pockets of Americans. And it's not just tourists trying out life there for a few months. These are families enrolling kids in local schools, professionals working remotely or launching businesses, retirees who have sold U.S. homes and are not planning to move back. When you ask why they moved, the answers often sound less like political speeches and more like practical lists. Common themes include wanting to live in places where gun violence feels rare, not wanting children to practice active shooter drills, preferring healthcare systems with more predictable costs, seeking environments where childcare and basic services are more affordable or accessible, desiring a lower daily stress level. In many of these countries, people describe very low rates of firearm-related incidents, public health systems where costs are more stable, social policies that support families differently than in the US. Most of those who shared their stories did not say, "I hate America." Many expressed affection for American culture, opportunities, and people. What they described instead was a calculation. They compared options and decided that, for their specific circumstances, living elsewhere felt more sustainable. What makes this notable is not simply that some people are moving abroad. That has always happened. What's different now are the scale and the profile of those leaving, often educated, mobile, and economically active people. Over time, if this continues, it can shape local economies and U.S. communities, school enrollment numbers, innovation and entrepreneurship, and broader demographics, especially if those leaving are of working age or are raising families abroad. The visible movement suggests a second layer question. Is this movement mainly political, or is it rooted in deeper, longer-term pressures? If it is primarily structural, then even a change in administration might not fully reverse it. Several long-standing challenges are part of this equation. Housing prices in many major U.S. cities have grown considerably faster than wages. Healthcare costs, premiums, and out-of-pocket expenses remain high and unpredictable for many families. Childcare is expensive in much of the country, often rivaling or exceeding rent payments. Student debt continues to affect life decisions decades after graduation. Vacation time, parental leave, and work-life balance policies tend to be more limited than in many other advanced economies. Taken together, these issues contribute to ongoing stress for many households. Polls have found that around 1 in 5 Americans say they would move abroad permanently if they had the opportunity. During the 2008 financial crisis, that number was closer to 1 in 10. The share has roughly doubled. That doesn't mean all of those people will leave. Many can't due to family, finances, jobs, or visa limits. But it does show how many are at least considering it. At the same time, we see a record number of Americans studying abroad, more young people with international exposure and contacts, more awareness of foreign residency options such as digital nomad visas, ancestry rights, or retiree programs. These changes lower the psychological hurdle of imagining a life outside the United States. On the other side, international students coming to the U.S., a major source of talent in tech, research, and healthcare, have faced uncertainty with visa rules and costs. While numbers remain high in many programs, the overall picture is more complex than in past decades when the U.S. was the singular default destination. None of these trends can be explained solely by one election or one political figure, but political climate can speed them up. During Donald Trump's second term, policies have included increased immigration enforcement and deportations, stricter views on certain aspects of higher education and academic freedom, tougher rhetoric on cross-border movement. Supporters see these as restoring control and emphasizing national interests. Others view them as making the environment feel unstable or less welcoming, especially for universities, research institutions, and immigrants. Regardless of perspective, perception affects behavior. For some Americans who already felt squeezed by housing, healthcare, or work stress, a sense that the overall trajectory is not improving or is becoming more polarized can be the push that turns maybe one day into, "I'm leaving next year." Historical examples help provide context. Large numbers of people have left countries when they lost confidence in stability, economic, political, or social. The U.S. has typically been the place people move to, not from. Today's situation is not comparable to the most extreme crises of the past. The U.S. remains a wealthy, influential country, but the fact that a growing number of its own citizens with skills and resources are looking outward is meaningful. It suggests a shift in how some Americans weigh their options. This is not about a sudden collapse. It's about momentum and mindset. There's also a demographic dimension. Policymakers and commentators frequently express concern about declining birth rates, pressure on programs like Social Security and Medicare, maintaining economic growth with an aging population. Population stability and growth come from two sources: births and migration. If fewer people immigrate to the U.S. long-term and more U.S. citizens or permanent residents decide to build their lives elsewhere, then the working-age population can shrink relative to retirees. That can affect tax revenues, labor markets, innovation capacity, and long-term economic performance. Historically, the U.S. has leveraged both relatively higher fertility and robust immigration to avoid some of the severe aging population problems seen in other countries. If both of those cushions weaken simultaneously, pressure builds. Many economists and demographers argue that to maintain a stable or growing workforce, legal immigration would need to stay strong or even increase. When immigration policies become more restrictive while some citizens leave, that's a tension to be aware of. This is not an argument for ignoring border controls or security discussions. It's simply recognizing that demographic math is not easily bent. Fewer entrants and more exits mean fewer people over time. Meanwhile, global mobility has changed. Remote work, international hiring, and digital services make it easier than ever for people in certain professions to live in one place and earn from another. Countries around the world actively market themselves to skilled workers, investors, and retirees. In that environment, people with portable skills have choices in ways that didn't exist a few decades ago. That doesn't mean everyone is leaving. Far from it, most Americans will stay. Many still view the U.S. as the best place for their goals. But it does mean that the U.S. is now competing more directly with other countries as a destination for talent, families, and businesses. A reasonable question to ask is, what would it take for more Americans to feel anchored and optimistic about their long-term prospects at home? Possible answers might include more predictable and affordable health care, improvements in housing affordability, better support for parents and caregivers, reforms that modernize immigration while maintaining security, and perhaps a calmer, more predictable political climate. These are not simple changes, but ignoring the signals won't make them go away. For individuals, decisions about whether to stay, leave, or split time between countries are deeply personal. They involve finances, family ties, cultural connections, and individual risk tolerance. Many people exploring options abroad are not declaring the U.S. a lost cause. They're exploring flexibility. Some may return later, others may not. The broader point is that when enough people with options begin testing alternatives, it's a sign that their confidence in the status quo has been shaken. The United States still has formidable strengths: premier universities, a large and dynamic economy, strong research ecosystems, and cultural influence. Those assets are real. At the same time, demographic and confidence trends deserve attention. Whether the current wave of Americans going abroad ends up being a brief chapter or the start of a longer shift will depend largely on policy choices, economic conditions, and whether people feel that the underlying issues driving their stress are being meaningfully addressed. When citizens speak with their feet, they're not just leaving, they're sending a signal. History suggests that listening to those signals and addressing root causes is more effective than dismissing them.